you could grow tomatoes on the moon? Well, probably not, unless you made an environment for plants there that included water, air, and nutrients. Imagine that you need to colonize the moon and you want to be able to grow some fruits and vegetables in a moon garden. Besides water, air, and nutrients, what other things would you need to make a healthy and natural vegetable garden? Click the highlighted areas in the image to get some ideas. When done, click the Next button to begin your voyage of discovery through some of our planet's many ecosystems. Some types of mushrooms are good to eat, but have you ever thought about what a mushroom consumes? Mushrooms consume dead material in the soil, like dead parts of plants. This mushroom is growing on and slowly consuming some dead leaves. This helps to keep the soil healthy. It looks like you can't bring just plants to the moon. You'd have to bring all the things in the environment that plants interact with, too. Butterflies, bees, ants, and even birds are important to plants. Do you know why? It's because many of these animals help to pollinate plants. You won't get vegetables in your garden if you don't have the right pollinators. Soil contains all kinds of living things. Some of these living things, like the earthworm, you can see with just your eyes. But if you use a microscope, you can see many other types of tiny organisms moving around in the soil. Water, nutrients, and animals like this earthworm are all essential parts of soil. Welcome to the lesson, What is an Ecosystem? In this lesson, you'll learn about the parts of an ecosystem. You'll also find out about how living things work together in an ecosystem and the effects of human activity on ecosystems. The vocabulary words for this lesson are environment, ecosystem, population, community, habitat, and niche. Click each word to find out more about it. Do you know what a coral is? Is it a plant or an animal? Many corals may look like plants, but they are actually tiny animals. They live in coral reefs. A coral reef is a place in warm, shallow ocean waters where many different kinds of animals live. More than 1,500 different kinds of fish live around Australia's Great Barrier Reef. Sea turtles, such as the one you see here, often live in and around coral reefs too. A coral reef is an example of an ecosystem. An ecosystem is a community of organisms and the environment in which they live. An environment is all of the living and non-living things that surround and affect an organism. Ecosystems have living or biotic parts and non-living or abiotic parts. Click the highlighted areas of the image to learn more. Consumers, such as animals, are also biotic parts of coral reef ecosystems. Many fish live in coral reefs. These fish eat algae, coral, or other fish. Fish usually live in the water around a reef. Some fish may live in cracks in the rocks or near other animals, such as anemones and sponges. Corals are the tiny animals from which coral reefs get their name. Corals build hard skeletons. When corals die, they leave these skeletons behind. New corals build on top of the old skeletons. Eventually, the skeletons build up, forming a reef. Ocean water is an important abiotic part of coral reef ecosystems. Ocean water contains oxygen, carbon dioxide, and other gases. Producers use carbon dioxide to make food. Both producers and consumers use oxygen to get energy. Ocean water also contains dissolved salt and minerals that producers and some animals need. Abiotic parts of an ecosystem include nutrients, light, air, and climate. Sunlight is one of the most important abiotic parts of an ecosystem. In coral reefs, algae, and other tiny producers use sunlight to make food. Rocks and sand are abiotic parts of an ecosystem. They provide homes to many animals and coral reef ecosystems. For example, clams, shrimps, or crabs may tunnel into the sand. Eels and other kinds of fish may live in cracks in the rocks. Producers, such as plants and algae, are biotic parts of an ecosystem. In coral reefs, algae may live on rocks or float in the water. Animals eat algae and other producers. How would you define the word population? Population doesn't just refer to the number of people in a place. The term population has a slightly different meaning in relation to ecosystems. A population is all of the organisms of the same kind that live together in an ecosystem. Click the images to learn more about populations and ecosystems. African savannas have dry seasons. During these times, several populations gather around watering holes. Populations of lions, birds, wildebeests, zebras, and other animals can make up the community around a watering hole. A community is made up of the populations of plants and animals that live in the same area and interact with each other. Populations of tiny elf owls rely on the populations of saguaro cacti in the American Southwest. The size of a sparrow, elf owls often nest in holes in saguaro cacti. They often use holes made by woodpeckers. The community of birds that lives on an Arctic cliff includes many populations. Dozens of populations, from auks to gulls to puffins, can be found living on Arctic cliffs during summer. These birds compete for nesting space and food. A pond community can include hundreds of populations. Producers include many kinds of plants, algae, and plankton. Consumers include frogs, insects, fishes, and more. Many organisms compete for food and space in a pond community. For example, both fish and toads might compete for insects. Tide pools are found in areas along rocky coasts. Tide pools are rich communities. Populations of sea urchins, oysters, barnacles, anemones, crabs, and others share a small space. These populations must be able to handle some exposure to air when the tide goes out. A single tree trunk can be home to a thriving community. A tree trunk can support populations of mosses, fungi, algae, insects, and more.